Hello and a very good evening. You're watching the news tonight with me, Frank Pereira, on Rajya Sabha television. Let's begin with the 9 p.m. headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi makes concluding remarks on the debate on commitment to constitution in the Rajya Sabha. Protest equals sedition in India today, says Congress Vice President Rahul Gandhi. Home Minister Rajnath Singh refutes charge of intolerance in the country. President calls for cleanliness campaign for the mind, says India and Indians need to get rid of divisive tendencies. RBI keeps interest rates intact in its monetary policy. Central Bank to watch inflationary trends before announcing its next step. And Russia makes an explosive charge against Turkey at the Paris climate talks, accuses Turkey of shooting down its jet to safeguard its oil trade with Islamic State. Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi today termed any atrocity as a blot on the society and the nation. In his reply to the discussion on commitment to the Constitution in the upper house, he urged greater focus on unity and social equality and termed the Constitution as the guiding light for everyone. After 3 days of discussion that saw many members raising the issue of intolerance, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's reply in the Rajya Sabha on Tuesday also addressed the issue.
सिर्फ बंधारण की सीमाओं में नहीं, समाज जागरूक भी उतना ही अनिवार्य है। ना हिंदू पति तो भवेत्, इस संकल्प को लेकर के आगे बढ़ने की आवश्यकता है। और ये बात इस सदन से उठनी चाहिए, ये बात सदन से पहुंचनी चाहिए। आज भी समाज में किसी के साथ इस प्रकार का अत्याचार अनाचार होता है तो ये हमारे लिए कलंक है, एक समाज के नाते कलंक है, एक देश के नाते कलंक है।
Responding to the charge of appropriation of legacies, Prime Minister said everyone played an important part in making of the Constitution.
ये कार्यक्रम अपने आप में उन सभी ऋषियों को जो कि संविधान सभा में बैठे थे, उनको नमन करने के लिए बनाया है, उनका आदर करने के लिए बनाया है। लेकिन करने का इरादा ये है कि इस राष्ट्र को आने वाले शतकों तक दिशा देने के लिए जिन महापुरुषों ने काम किया है, हमारी आगे वाली पीढ़ी जाने तो, समझे तो। और इसलिए उसमें मेरी पार्टी का कोई सदस्य होता तभी मैं याद करूं, ऐसे देश नहीं चलता है।
Quoting the first Prime Minister Pandit Nehru, Modi also reiterated the importance of coordination between both houses, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha.
हमारे संविधान का सफल क्रियान्वयन किसी भी लोकतांत्रिक संरचना की भांति दोनों सदनों के बीच आपसी सहयोग पर निर्भर करता है। और इसलिए हमारे लिए आवश्यक बन जाता है कि हम किस प्रकार से मिलजुल करके इस बात को आगे चलाएं।
The Prime Minister also emphasized the need to stay united and ensure social equality. Vishal Daya for Rajya Sabha Television, Delhi. Well, a united opposition upped the ante against the government in the Rajya Sabha while holding the discussion on commitment to the Constitution. The government faced the attack on the issue of intolerance and controversial remarks made by some union ministers and BJP MPs. However, the JDU also announced its support to the government's ambitious goods and services tax bill. Here's more.
The opposition parties remained unrelenting in cornering the government as Rajya Sabha debated the commitment to the constitution. Slamming the BJP over the issue of Hindu Rashtra, JDU leader KC Tyagi cited the low representation of Muslims in political and constitutional posts. He also lashed out at some BJP leaders for their Pakistan remarks, reminding them that Indian Muslims did not go to Pakistan during partition despite having the option.
देश के अंदर जितनी भी विधानसभाएं हैं, एक भी मुसलमान किसी भी विधानसभा का स्पीकर नहीं है, इंक्लूडिंग जम्मू एंड कश्मीर। कैसा हिंदू राष्ट्र बनाना चाहते हो?
Trinamool Congress member Derek O'Brien accused Finance Minister Arun Jaitley of indulging in cowboy constitutionalism on the issue of obstructions in Parliament. He alleged that the government was trying to belittle the importance of the upper house of Parliament, a charge strongly refuted by the Leader of the House, Arun Jaitley.
So one gets very disturbed and saddened that a lawyer and an eloquent speaker like the Leader of the House, outside the House, make statements demeaning this Rajya Sabha. To quote, and I quote the Leader of the House, "It's a serious question in a parliamentary democracy wherein bill after bill, the wisdom of a directly elected House is questioned by the indirectly elected House." I have to tell, through you, sir, to the Leader of the House, please do not indulge in cowboy constitutionalism.
In a bicameral system, the relationship between two houses is a constitutional issue, not a cowboy issue.
CPI leader D. Raja condemned the atrocities against Dalits and demanded caste-based reservation in the private sector.
Government will have to consider to extend the policy of reservation in private sector. And what is private sector, sir? Yeah, one should be very clear. What is private sector? As Mr. K. R. Narayanan himself has said, we are not asking.
Everybody knows the definition. You need not define
the policies of socialism.
Please conclude.
AIADMK's Shashikala Pushpa, DMK MP Tiruchi Shiva, Congress MP Jesadasu Seelam, Republican Party of India A's Ramdas Athavale also pitched for inclusive development. Kriti Mishra's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
Meanwhile, the government has categorically denied that intolerance is on the rise in the country. Replying to a debate on the issue in the Lok Sabha, Home Minister Rajnath Singh called the protests against intolerance fabricated. He called out to intellectuals, saying that the government was willing to listen to their problems. During the debate, Congress Vice President Rahul Gandhi accused the government of ignoring all voices of dissent. Dissatisfied with the Home Minister's reply, several opposition MPs walked out of the House.
Home Minister Rajnath Singh said in Lok Sabha on Tuesday that those who say that intolerance is on the rise in the country are actually doing the nation a lot of harm. He in fact termed this issue and award wapsi as fabricated. Rajnath Singh accused those who are returning awards of politicizing the issue.
विषय तो बहुत गंभीर है, लेकिन आरोप लगाने वालों से मैं कहना चाहता हूं, विचार करिए। यह विषय आत्मघाती है और मैं समझता हूं देश के लिए आत्मघाती है। मैं अपील करना चाहता हूं कि ऐसे बयानों से हम लोगों को बचना चाहिए।
The Home Minister also defended the Prime Minister's silence on the issue, saying Modi did not need to speak on everything. Rajnath also had a defense ready for irresponsible statements made by his cabinet colleagues and some BJP leaders.
उन्होंने अपना क्लैरिफिकेशन दे दिया, उसके बाद भी बार-बार ये कहना कि उन्होंने ऐसे अपशब्दों का प्रयोग कर दिया, ये कर दिया, वो कर दिया। मैं समझता हूं ये न तो इस सरकार के साथ न्याय है, अध्यक्ष महोदय, और न तो यह देश के साथ यह न्याय है।
Participating in the debate, Congress Vice President Rahul Gandhi accused the government of staying mum on the issue of intolerance. He also accused the Prime Minister of protecting his minister, General V.K. Singh, contending that the government was trying to silence dissenters.
Pansare ji and Kalburgi ji are shot dead in cold blood by fanatics. The Prime Minister has nothing to say. Nothing to say.
If my children do something wrong, if I participate, उस कृति में सहभाग रह रही हूँ। अगर सहभाग भी नहीं दे रही हूँ, कुछ बोलूँ नहीं, तो उसको कहते हैं अनुमोदन कर रही हूँ। और अगर मैं मौन रखूँ, तो भी आप बोलेंगे गलती तुम्हारी है, तुम माँ हो, तुमने कुछ क्यों नहीं कहा। Sir, this is my objection to the government.
As Rajnath Singh gave his reply in the House, MPs of the Congress and left parties walked out of the House along with other opposition members. With Pranav Goswami, Shyam Sundar's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
While a delegation of the Asian Forum of Parliamentarians on Population and Development called on Deputy Chairman of the Rajya Sabha PJ Kurian today. The delegation includes members from Afghanistan, Bhutan and various other nations. The Deputy Chairman apprised them about the nuances of parliamentary procedures. The delegation also received a warm welcome at Parliament House. Meanwhile, in the middle of a raging debate on perceived intolerance in the country, President Pranab Mukherjee has once again delivered a sharp message on the issue. This time, he said that the real dirt of India lies in the minds of its people and not on the streets. He called out to all Indians, asking them to cleanse their minds of divisive thoughts.
The outdoors of India lies not in our streets, but in our minds, and in our unwillingness to let go of views that divide society into them and us.
It is important for Indians to cleanse their minds of divisive thoughts. That's the message sent out by the President. Citing Gandhiji's vision of India as an inclusive nation, he said the essence of being human was our trust of each other.
Every day we see unprecedented violence all around us. At the heart of this violence is darkness, fear and mistrust. While we invent new modes of combating these ever-spiraling violence, we must not forget the power of non-violence, dialogue and reason.
This is not the first time the President has spoken about intolerance in the country after the Dadri lynching and other such incidents. Exhorting the father of the nation once again, the President said he gave us an object lesson in ahimsa.
We must free our public discourse of all forms of violence, physical as well as verbal. Only a non-violent society can ensure the participation of all sections of the people, especially the marginalized, and the dispossessed in our democratic process.
The President's reminders come in the backdrop of the Parliament also debating the intolerance issue. President Mukherjee was speaking at the inauguration of the Archives and Research Centre at Sabarmati Ashram. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Moving on now, the RBI decided to keep interest rates intact in its monetary policy announcement today. The central bank said it will watch the inflationary trends before making its next move. RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan said that the focus of monetary policy will shift towards achieving a consumer inflation target of 5% by March 2017.
The RBI on Tuesday retained the repo rate at which it lends to commercial banks at 6.75%. The cash reserve ratio, funds that banks need to keep with the central bank, was also held steady at 4%. RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan said the bank will keep an eye on commodity prices, especially food and oil.
We believe its effect on aggregate demand will be offset by appropriate budgetary tightening as the government stays on its fiscal consolidation path.
The central bank cut repo rate by 50 basis points in this last policy review in September. In all, the central bank has cut by 125 basis points this year to spur economic growth. However, retail inflation climbed to a 4-month high of 5% in October as food prices escalated on supply deficiency in pulses.
The only uncomfortable thing is they have insisted there should be control and better monitoring on food items. Basically, this is the only thing which is a matter of concern.
The industry found Rajan's move pragmatic but warned of upcoming fiscal and inflationary pressures after 7th Pay Commission recommendations are implemented.
More than £1 lakh crore goes to the Pay Commission while implementing the recommendation of the Pay Commission. Certainly it will put a huge burden on the central government budget, and the state government will be in deep trouble.
The RBI governor noted that second quarter GDP numbers indicate early signs of recovery, but he chose to stick to the earlier projection of 7.4% for the current fiscal. India's gross domestic product for the 3-month period ending September grew 7.4%, slightly higher than the 7% in the previous quarter. Kriti Mishra's report for Rajya Sabha Television.
Let's now bring you up to date with some more national stories in our segment Nationwide. The Enforcement Directorate and Income Tax Department today conducted raids on firms linked to Congress leader Karti Chidambaram. The move is in connection with the money laundering probe in the Aircel Maxis case. Raids were conducted on Vasan Eye Care and Advantage Strategic, a company that is also involved in the Aircel Maxis deal. Security forces on Monday night busted a militant hideout and recovered arms and ammunition in the Poonch district of Jammu and Kashmir. The recoveries included rifles, pistols and grenades. PIL activist and senior lawyer Shrikant Khandalkar was found dead in mysterious circumstances in Nagpur on Sunday. He had helped to expose the Maharashtra irrigation scam. Khandalkar's family sought police investigation into the death. Heavy rains lashed Tamil Nadu and neighbouring Puducherry, disrupting scheduled flights and flooding several areas. Education institutes were also closed because of the heavy downpour. The Weather Office forecast heavy to very heavy rainfall in both regions tomorrow as well. Well, it's time for a short break now, but news and updates will continue on the other side. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
GDP figures rise for second quarter. RBI holds its lending rate. Are these signs of economic recovery? Is India's growth story back on track? Watch the big picture at 9:30 p.m. on Rajya Sabha television.
Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha television. Well, on the second day of the climate summit in Paris, world leaders continued to debate ways to cut down carbon emissions. French President François Hollande announced investments worth billions for Africa, while US President Barack Obama met leaders of Pacific Island nations to allay their fears. Here's more.
Marathon meetings at the Climate Change Summit in Paris. US President Barack Obama held talks with leaders of Pacific Island nations, all of whom had expressed concerns that their very existence was at stake.
Financing has to reflect the unique needs of the most vulnerable countries in how it operates, and that those pledges have to be real.
For those of us whose survival, whose very survival is at stake, our plea is very simple. Let us give substance to the pledges that are being made. Let us not pay lip service to an issue that demands immediate and urgent action.
France will invest billions of euros in renewable energies in Africa in the coming years. The announcement came as French President François Hollande met heads of states from African countries on the sidelines of the summit.
Il y a une dette écologique que le monde, et en particulier le monde développé, doit régler à l'égard du continent africain. Une part très substantielle de notre effort bénéficiera à l'Afrique et notamment à l'électrification du continent sans même attendre 2020.
We are the most affected, especially countries around the Great Green Wall. It is for this reason that the African Unified Voice at this summit calls for legally binding instrument applicable to all parties within a global governance framework.
France and Mexico, along with the heads of the World Bank and IMF, urged other nations and big corporations to put a price on carbon emissions. They also launched the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition initiative. Security remains tight in the French capital as more delegates arrived for the second day of the UN Climate Change Conference. The COP21 aims for a new agreement that will put the world on track to limit global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius over the next few years. After the failure of a previous summit in Copenhagen 6 years ago, a landmark agreement is expected this time around. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Well, joining me for a chat this evening to talk about this is Sunita Narayan, Director General, Centre for Science and Environment. A very good evening and thank you for joining me on the program, Sunita. You know, as far as the Paris talks are concerned, what is it do you think that the talks aim to achieve, and what is it that we see being achieved as far as these talks are concerned? Well, we seem to have lost the line there with Sunita Narayan, but we'll try and reconnect with her and try and see what she has to say about this and where these particular talks are headed. But several people have in fact come out and spoken. Several world leaders have said the time for change is now. And we saw that Prime Minister Narendra Modi Barack Obama, François Hollande, all the big leaders, Vladimir Putin as well, were all present there, who had in fact addressed people and also had to say what they wanted to say about what they bring to the table. Rejoining us right now is Sunita Narayan, Director General, Centre for Science and Environment. A very good evening, Sunita, and thank you for joining me on the program. You know, as far as the Paris talks are concerned, what is it that we see being achieved?
Thank you, Frank. Well, see, Frank, we definitely need an ambitious agreement on climate change. That will not happen in Paris because the current actions that countries have put on the table are not ambitious enough. But what is being said is that if in Paris we can agree that this is the beginning, then we at least have a roadmap on how to proceed. But this also in Paris means that developing countries have to achieve one big thing, which is to get an assurance that the roadmap will be based on the principles of climate justice and equity. So on one hand, we need an ambitious deal, but we also need an equitable deal. And what is happening right now, the politics in Paris is to somehow silence and muzzle the voice of the developing countries and of countries like India. You would have seen the New York Times article today. You have seen statements by former ministers of the UPA government. The entire effort is to get the American point of view, which is to find a way not to have equity in the agreement accepted in Paris. That should be unacceptable for us.
You know, you spoke about assurances. Assurances have been made in the past as well. From 20 years, we've seen assurances being made by some of the developed nations. But, you know, are these assurances really going to be kept is the question.
Yeah. No, that's a very good question, Frank. And I would argue that we should stop only talking about money and technology because the developed world has shown no ability to give us the money. You have seen today a very good critique from the Indian government challenging the figures that have been put out by OECD, which are really double accounting, which are trying to pass off as climate finance all the money that they're giving in ODA or giving as a loan even in the case of Exim Bank. So I think money and technology is not going to come. But I think what developing countries need to ask for is their share, a fair share of the global carbon budget. And that is something that we need in the agreement so that we can actually build a way ahead for us where we have both the right to development, but we can also therefore ask for a trading mechanism, perhaps based on the value of carbon, so that the developed countries pay the share. So instead of asking for money as charity, we need to ask for it as our fair share to the carbon space. The other thing that we need to do is to talk about loss and damage. The US is trying to turn the entire conversation on loss and damage, which is to estimate something like the Chennai floods that we are seeing now, or the unseasonal rain that you see where huge devastation is happening to farmers. Those are the losses that need to be estimated so that we can attribute it to climate change. And then we need the damage to be paid for. That's the conversation at Paris. But the US wants to turn it into something called insurance and not have to estimate the loss and the damage. So I think India and the developing worlds and countries like from Africa have to hold together to make sure we get a deal which is in the interests of the poor of the world.
Indeed, you know, talking about the US, President Barack Obama has said that the Paris conference is going to be a turning point as far as climate is concerned. Do you believe that it's going to be the turning point that the world requires or needs?
Well, I think, President Obama's passion and commitment for climate change is clear. It comes out very clearly when he speaks. And I think when he's asking for a turning point, I believe he understands the urgency of the situation.
Right.
But the unfortunate part of it, Frank, is that the US itself is turning out to have such a weak action plan. So if you really want a turning point on climate change, then President Obama has to convince his own people to have a climate action plan that makes a difference. Our own critique, which we have published in Capitan America, shows clearly that the US emissions are not going to reduce. So I think it's important for the world that the United States walks the talk. I think it's important for the world that all of us walk the talk.
Indeed, it is important for the entire world that all of us walk the talk and not just assurances but actual action is taken on the ground. Sunita Narayan, thank you so much for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Moving on now, well, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi returned home after pushing for green diplomacy at the Paris Climate Change Conference. Addressing the Mission Innovation event hosted by US President Barack Obama, Modi said that developing nations need space to grow while combating issues of climate change and global warming. Modi also launched the International Solar Alliance along with French President Francois Hollande. He pledged India's assistance of $30 million for the initiative, which is aimed at bringing together developed and developing countries. Modi had a packed schedule as he also held bilateral talks with top international leaders, including US President Barack Obama, Japanese President Shinzo Abe, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani, and a host of other world leaders. He also met his Pakistani counterpart Nawaz Sharif for a casual meeting on the sidelines of the summit.
We have to ensure, in the spirit of climate justice, that the life of a few does not crowd out the opportunity for the many still on the initial stage of the development ladder. The advanced countries must leave enough room for developing countries to grow.
Some more international news now. Russia-Turkey relations continued to nosedive over the shooting down of a Russian jet near the Syrian border. At the Climate Talks Summit in Paris, Turkey challenged Russia to prove its claim that Ankara shot down the plane to protect its oil trade with Islamic State. The US, meanwhile, appealed to both the nations to set aside tensions and focus on their common enemy, the Islamic State.
Last week, Turkey suggested that climate talks in Paris will be an appropriate place to ease tensions with Russia. But instead, the two nations had heated exchanges over downing the Russian plane near the Syrian-Turkish border. Turkey challenged Russia to prove its claims that the plane was shot down to protect its oil interests with the Islamic State. President Erdogan even pledged to step down if allegations were proved true.
И у нас есть все основания полагать, что и решение по поводу того, чтобы сбить наш самолет, было продиктовано желанием обеспечить безопасность этих путей доставки нефти на территорию Турции. Как раз к портам, откуда они отгружаются в танкеры.
Böyle bir olayı yaşanmasına sebebiyet verecek provokatif girişimler, provokatif adımlar atılmaz. Ama Türkiye'nin kendi sınırlarını koruma ve kendi ulusal stratejik çıkarlarını koruma iradesinden de
US President Barack Obama called on both leaders to move beyond their diplomatic confrontation and focus on the Islamic State jihadist threat. This came after Obama met with his Turkish counterpart in Paris. NATO has also warned that such incidents continue to be a risk.
I welcome Turkey's efforts to establish contacts with Moscow and to its contacts with Russia to de-escalate the situation. I urge Russia to play a constructive role in Syria by targeting ISIL, our common enemy.
Meanwhile, the body of Russian pilot who was killed arrived in Moscow late on Monday from Ankara. The pilot was killed when ethnic Turkish rebels opened fire as both crew members parachuted to the ground when their plane was hit on Tuesday. The second pilot was rescued. The downing of the Russian warplane wrecked Turkish-Russian relations, with Russia already slapping Turkey with a series of economic sanctions. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Moving on to some sports news now in Sports Beat. Barcelona claimed 5 La Liga awards for the 2014-15 season, while arch-rivals Real Madrid took 3 trophies at the ceremony in Barcelona. Barcelona striker Lionel Messi won 2 of the 5 Barca awards in the Liga Gala as Best Player and Best Striker last season. 3 leading Kenyan athletics officials were suspended by the Ethics Commission of Athletics governing body IAAF. All 3 were suspended over potential subversion of the anti-doping control process in the African country. Athletics Kenya President Isaiah Kiplagat, Vice President David Okeyo and 2015 World Championships team leader Joseph Kinyua were suspended for 180 days. Former world number 8 Janko Tipsarevic confirmed his participation at the Chennai Open to be held next January. With his inclusion, the 20th edition of the tournament will see 10 players from the world's top 50 list. Tipsarevic clinched the doubles crown with Indian ace Leander Paes in the 2012 edition. And finally on the newscast, the Border Security Force celebrated its 50th Raising Day on Monday. Home Minister Rajnath Singh attended the celebration in New Delhi. Several other programs were also organized to mark the occasion. We'll leave you with images from the celebrations. Good night.